start off with a little illustration as a preacher. So most of us remember the Wizard of Oz and how Dorothy, the Tin Man, Scarecrow, Cowardly Lion, they made their way to Oz with the hope that there at Oz they would find the answer to their issues. And they discovered that there was a man behind the curtain controlling everything. And he said, hey, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And that's a lot of what you find in government. Most people put their focus on elected officials, rightfully so. Boards, elected officials. But there, particularly on the local level, there's a huge apparatus that drive a lot of the policies, decision makings around how resources are allocated. And they're called boards, commissions, and municipal authorities. And most people are not cognizant of the power that these entities actually wield. So when we talk about municipal authorities are very interesting. All of us are very aware. You got SEPTA, right? On a larger macro scale, you got SEPTA, you have the Airport Authority. Here in the Lehigh Valley, we have Atlanta, you've got the ANISDA, you've got the Parking Authority. All of these things are called the municipal authorities. And municipal authorities are entities that are charged with providing an essential, critical civil service, and they don't want that service to be politicized. So they create these autonomous entities known as municipal authorities that are operated by a charter. Most municipal authorities have some, whether it's a city, whether it's a county, whether it's a state that oversees their charter, that is liable and responsible for the failure of that authority in terms of debt and liability and assets. And those entities make a lot of powerful decisions. And the boards, the way they are constructed, all of the individuals on those boards are appointed. They are appointed. And they make powerful decisions within the scope of their charter. Then you have boards and commissions. And there's a lot of different boards. I just grabbed some information here just in terms of the city of Allentown. The city of Allentown deals with 6 municipal authorities, 16 boards, and 6 commissions. 6 municipal authorities, 16 boards, and 6 commissions. All of these entities are making, to some level, some degree, policy decisions. What I have experienced in my time in government is that we do not proactively seek to be engaged and to be involved in this level of government. There's no limelight with it that comes with it, right? There's no press that comes with it, right? There's not a lot of stuff that you're looking to build a name for yourself, so to speak. There's not a lot of stuff there. But the power in this, for us as a community, as we try to access power both on the elected official side, but also in terms of influence and shaping policy. So for instance, the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission, state required for every region, we have a joint planning commission here in the Lehigh Valley, made up of Lehigh and Northampton County. They shape the long-term developmental projection of the region. That projection and that report that they are required to submit to the state shapes funding. It shapes transformation funding. Most of us here in the Lehigh Valley, we know that 22 is getting backed up, and 22, it needs to be widened. Resources need to be provided there. Well, when they put that report shapes what the transportation department decides to fund in the region. And there are none of us on that board. There are no Black and brown people on that board. I tried to get some folks on that board, but they didn't want to do it because I'm just going to assume they didn't understand the power of it. The other benefit to that is it provides us access to decision makers, and it gives us the opportunity to develop relationships and influence. Anybody on this Zoom, the brother that ran the campaign, understands this one central thing about politics and power. It's about relationships and networking. And having the opportunity to have access to decision makers and to develop relationships, to say, hey, after the meeting, man, let's go grab some coffee, or hey, can we get coffee in the morning? And developing those relationships, that provides dividends later on down the road as you're trying to build your political and influence capital in the region. I'm going to take, for example, the Regional Water Authority. There was a big battle here in the Lehigh, particularly in the city of Allentown, when the city leased its water and sewer operations because it had a $180 million pension liability that it couldn't fund. And the state said you need to come up with a plan, so they monetized an asset, which made a whole lot of sense. And there was a lot of debate about whether or not, should it be a for-profit company or should it be a nonprofit company. We're fortunate enough in the Lehigh Valley to have the Lehigh County Water Authority, which is the municipal authority. One of the reasons that the Lehigh Valley was one of the fastest growing areas in the state prior to COVID in terms of both economic development, new housing development, and population growth was because the Water Authority, because they didn't have the same constraints as a for-profit company, they were able to build the infrastructure for growth and development in the western part of the county 10 years out before it was needed. So when developers are looking to come into the region, they want to know, is this stuff already built? Is there a grid already laid out? Or am I going to have to spend money to do that? A for-profit company isn't going to spend that money before it's needed. Now, those decisions of building sewage infrastructure, and if you've never understood how critical sewage infrastructure is, it is essentially critical. Those decisions shape how economic development happens in the region, where it happens in the region. And again, there are no Black and brown people on that board. So these boards are essential. They are the delegation arm of elected officials. There's a lot of power that's delegated to these entities, and they exercise it and they wield it, and it impacts and shapes a lot of things about our lives that we're not consciously aware of, and we're not at the table making those decisions and influencing those processes.
So David, how do we get on those boards?
Those boards, good question, Mike, because I'm trying to be cognizant, not to go over 10 minutes. Those positions are appointed positions. So all of these boards and municipal authorities, they are appointed by the overseeing governmental entity. So the county has its own boards and commissions. There are 16 boards, commissions, and municipal authorities that the county appoints people to. So elected officials appoint people. People's names are nominated, and once those names are nominated, it's the elected officials that say up or down. Like I'm thinking again, the Real Estate Appeals Board. That has to do with real estate values, property values, and tax assessment. Most people don't think that's important. That's vitally important. When the NIS was built and we went to challenge the NIS in terms of them paying what we thought was their fair share of taxes.
Now, Dave, you have to explain the NIS because we have some brothers on from New Jersey as well as Philadelphia.
Okay, so the NIS is, brother from Philadelphia, you'll like this. The NIS is a very, very unique economic development platform. So the state decided to allow the city of Allentown to create an economic stimulus engine that basically does this. If a developer builds a building, and we've had beautiful buildings built downtown, and he solicits somebody, a company, to come and to lease the space, 8 different state property taxes that business would normally send to Harrisburg, 8 different payroll taxes, profit taxes, all this stuff, 8 different ones. Instead of it going to Harrisburg, it stays in the NIS, and those monies are then used to pay the debt service on the public bonds that were taken out by the authority. So we're building privately owned buildings utilizing public bonds that are financed by money that used to go to Harrisburg, but now it stays here, to the tune of $91 million a year that's being invested in downtown Allentown. And all of that is being controlled by the ANISDA, the Allentown Neighborhood Improvement Zone Development Authority. We just had a big issue here in the city when one of the folks from our community was nominated by the mayor, but then his nomination was beat back and rejected. Not only was it beat back and rejected, they actually changed the rules so that the mayor couldn't nominate anybody anymore. And this is one of the biggest economic development platforms in the entire state, if not the biggest in the state. And there are a few of us on there, but there could be more. And again, it's not just, in my opinion, it's not just the work that these platforms do. It is the networks and the relationships that you can build, and then you can turn that currency into more influence, more access.
Okay, so Dave, I'm opening this up to Micah. Micah, I'm gonna ask you to unmute. What do you think about boards and authorities in Philadelphia gaining access to those?
So I think David lays out an incredible story and narrative about the infrastructure of what we would call in most of America our immediate first ring suburbs. And as we have seen migration and population shifts, people have moved out of Philadelphia and began to move into these first ring communities, whether you want to say it's Delaware County or Chester County or what have you, or even up to Lehigh, up to the Lehigh Valley area. And what we ended up seeing was that African Americans got there and were unable to understand the nuances and the politics of how the infrastructure operated. And so David lays out something that I contend needs to be talked to and actually ought to be a seminar. In this case, let's call it a Zoom webinar for people of color in first ring communities, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the country. And let me give this example where David lifts up this issue and how it has not worked for people of color necessarily in the Lehigh Valley. It has worked when you think about Prince George's County, Maryland. It has worked when you think of certain counties in New Jersey. So it's not a matter of it doesn't work. What we haven't done is educated our people well enough so that when these elected positions become available for county commissioners and things of that nature, instead of us going poo-poo, oh, I only want to be a congressperson or a state representative or a state senator, I think David would agree, they fail to realize that oftentimes there is more power in being that county commissioner or being on that network board or that transportation board, if it's an elected position, than anything else. Still using David's piece, it always gets back to, Mike, who we elect in office, because the power lies in those who we have elected. And yes, the NIS is a wonderful initiative that was done in Allentown. But it was done in Allentown because there were political relationships that were tied to Harrisburg. And so if the person in Harrisburg hadn't been elected, you know, Allentown would have never had that NIS developed maybe in that manner, where it particularly may have pushed out people of color in Allentown. And so for me, it always gets down to, we've got to learn how to elect people at the top, middle, and bottom of the ballot. Yep. Listen, you've heard, Mike, you've heard me tell this story a lot of times. You are more likely, we as people of color, more likely to see a person in a black robe than to see the president of the United States. Mm-hmm. Yet, we are going to spend every hour, tier, moment to make sure about the presidential election. And it is important, don't get me wrong. But just as important for me, and if not more important, are the people we're putting in the black robes that sit in our municipal courts, in our county courts, that oftentimes our people are going to see more than the president of the United States. And so when we do that, when we talk about judges and we talk about county commissioners and we talk about DAs and we talk about sheriffs, if you elect them or what have you, we've got to start getting down to and we all have heard this, all politics is local. We have gotten caught up in the fact that we believe we ought to be playing more national than local. Politics for people of color starts from the bottom up. And until we begin to change where we live, we'll never be able to truly impact the nation like we really should. Let me just step back for a minute. The reason why you're seeing such an outbreak of voting in Georgia was because African Americans in Atlanta decided enough was enough. And so it started with them making sure they always secured the mayor's seat, city council, and then it just kept growing. And now you got Raphael Warnock running for Senate. You had you had Abrams running a few years ago. Again, all politics starts local. And so until we begin to pull our people back and really have a deep understanding about who these people are that we see every day when we go to the supermarket, when we go to school, when we're not in COVID, of course, when we're driving down the street, those positions and those people are actually even more important than, I dare say, the president of the United States.